To remove the plastic coolant pipe, I like to remove the oil filter housing. The oil filter housing is held in place by three 13mm bolts. So you want to remove those, as well as disconnect the oil pressure switch that's sitting on top of the oil filter housing. It's a bit tight to get to, but if you have a 1/4" extension with a universal 13mm swivel socket, it makes things a little bit easier. You want to replace that seal as well, that little O-ring seal that looks like a figure 8. Now I disconnect the hose that attaches to the plastic pipe, but I disconnect it from the oil cooler and then pull the hose off the oil cooler, and then when I pull the pipe out, that hose comes along, and it makes it a lot easier to install and remove the pipe with the hose attached to the pipe, rather than trying to disconnect the hose from the pipe. Just like before, those hose clamp pliers with the cable are a much easier way to go than regular hose clamp pliers. The hose itself will need to be broken free, and they pretty much like to glue themselves to the oil cooler, so you just use a pry bar or something to try to coax that hose free from the oil cooler. And from the top, there's just the harness connector for the speed sensor and knock sensor. It's a plastic clip that clips around the coolant pipe. So what you need to do is remove the speed sensor and the knock sensor connectors from that harness first.
Speed sensor.
And here's that plastic harness.
Picking up some knock sensor.
It's a bit of a pain to get to. Once that's off and the hose is loose from the bottom, that pipe should be ready to come out. You can just grab it and yank on it and then twist it out. It's best if you have a second person, one person from the top, to pull on it, and here I am applying pressure from underneath. You basically just wiggle that pipe loose. It's a fairly snug fit over time. That O-ring likes to just seeds right in that block. Once the pipe is loose, you need to maneuver it past the secondary air pump or whatever else that might be there.
Hold on, I can see, yeah. It should come. Well, hold on, you got your, no, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, you got to twist it a little bit. Counterclockwise, yeah. Pull it. Okay, when I tell you twist it clockwise, you can twist clockwise a little bit. Good. Pull. That. Should be able to keep going. Wait, there's a couple of speed sensor connectors here. Hold on. You're catching up on those. Oh, I see. Yeah. I gotta put them on this side of the hose. 1 second. Okay. Yeah. Relax.
Cleaning is very important, obviously, just like with all the other jobs. You want to make sure everything is nice and clean, so that when things go back together, there's a nice clean mating surface. The hole for the piker is a bit difficult to get to, especially when there's air conditioning involved. You could also just move the air conditioning compressor out of the way, but that obviously takes more time. So just a bit of rubber grease to help keep the seals nice and lubricated for easy removal in the future. So drain plug going back in. Now the coolant hose needs to be transferred over, so you want to make sure you get the angle right, just so that you don't kink the hose later on because it's sitting in the wrong position.
Hey, Roger. Rotate left.
This is the pipe being installed
A little
again.
more.
And you just, again, it's easier with two people, one guy to look from the bottom, the other guy
Okay,
from the
slow,
top,
hold
and you
on.
just basically rotate it into place because there's several fittings at different
Okay,
angles that you need to
wait.
worry about. And because
Okay,
it is a
rotate
plastic
more.
pipe, you don't want it breaking.
Left. You can. Okay, hold it. Gotta line up the fitting. Okay. Wait, make sure everything is clear. Okay, good. It's already in, yep. Thank you.
Once the pipe is in place, you can put the thermostat housing together with or the whole coolant flange assembly, put it together, put in a new sensor, put in a thermostat, and then coax the whole assembly back in. The O-ring on that coolant pipe is lubricated so that it should slide all together nicely. Don't forget to plug in the temperature sensor. Make sure that the bolts start nicely. You don't want to fight a bolt into a threaded hole. If the bolt seems to be going in tight, back it back out, start one of the other ones, and just work them in all evenly. It ensures nothing's getting cross-threaded and that the flange is going to sit nice and flush with the cylinder head. Little bracket is just to hold some of the wiring harnesses, not necessarily out of the way, it just holds them nice and steady so that as the engine's moving, everything's moving together and the harness doesn't rub on anything, which could cause wear and tear. Bit of fast forwarding now, back down to the oil filter. Put a new O-ring in there, lubricate the O-ring a little bit. Just install it in reverse of removal. Don't forget to plug in the oil pressure switch. And here's just a bit of cleaning off of the residual oil, so you don't want to have old oil dripping, and that could cause you to think that you still have a leak someplace. Make sure all the wiring harnesses are plugged in and routed correctly. Coolant bottle removal is straightforward. A couple of hose clamps, a couple of screws that hold it in place. Movement's a bit limited because of the short hose on the bottom. If you remove the bolt for the power steering reservoir, you can get a little bit more room to maneuver pliers in there. Installation is in reverse, as with anything else. It's fairly straightforward. Coolant bottle is tight. At this point you can pretty much add coolant already before attaching everything else. Battery is next. I could have waited actually because I still have to do the ignition coil. But like I said, not every job is done the same, so I should have probably waited with the battery to have more room at this point, but worked out either way. Start it up and hook up your scan tool so that you can monitor coolant temperature, and basically just monitor to make sure thermostat opens and no trouble codes are stored, and the fan comes on.